For what purpose does the distinguished gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Stiles, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to H.Res. 294, I call up the bill H.R. 22, the Safeguard American Voters Eligibility Act, and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 22, a bill to amend the National Voter Registration Act of 1993 to require proof of United States citizenship to register an individual to vote in elections for federal office and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 294, the bill is considered read. The bill shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on House Administration or their respective designees. The gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Stiles, and the gentleman from New York, Mr. Morrell, will each control up to 30 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Stiles.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include additional material on the bill.
Objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consent.
Gentleman is recognized.
I rise in support of the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, known as the SAVE Act, introduced by my colleague Chip Roy of Texas. As chairman of the Committee on House Administration, I've been focused on improving election integrity and increasing confidence in our elections. Let me be clear. Non-citizen voting reduces confidence in our elections. American elections are for American citizens, and we intend to keep it that way. The SAVE Act will strengthen our elections administration and restore Americans' confidence in our elections. The SAVE Act contains critical reforms to update the National Voter Registration Act, which currently requires states to give registration forms to everyone who receives a driver's license regardless of citizenship. The bill before us would help states prevent non-citizens from voting in federal elections by requiring states to obtain documentary proof of U.S. citizenship in person when registering an individual to vote in federal elections. You're sure to hear from my colleagues on the other side that non-citizen voting doesn't exist or that rarely happens or that we don't need to do anything about it. Couldn't be further from the truth. However, let's look back 2 months ago. The secretaries of state that I had conversations with shared with me their difficulties that they're experiencing administering the most recent election. 2 of their top concerns were about integrity of voter rolls and non-citizen voting. In our most recent elections, we've just saw 13 individuals referred by the Michigan Secretary of State to the Attorney General for non-citizen voting in the state of Michigan. In the House of Representatives, we often see close elections. We have one member here who won her election by simply 6 votes. It's clear we must pass the SAVE Act and prevent non-citizen voting. There's also been many other examples of non-citizens voting or being on states' voter rolls. Just a few years ago, Illinois removed almost 600 non-citizens from its voter rolls. In Pennsylvania, almost 10,000 non-citizens were removed from their voter rolls. In Georgia, an audit recently determined more than 1,600 non-citizens had attempted to register to vote. Every state also needs access to the tools necessary to remove non-citizens from their voter rolls. Right now, states don't have free access to the federal data that tracks citizenship status. Another crucial element of the SAVE Act will provide states with cost-free access to existing federal and state databases so they can perform this important voter list maintenance. In recent years, we've seen an increasing number of jurisdictions across the country allowing non-citizens to vote in municipal elections. Right here in our nation's capital, non-citizens are eligible to vote in those municipal elections. And in Washington, D.C., a non-citizen only has to reside in the district for 30 days in order to register to vote. 388 non-citizens cast ballots here in our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. in the most recent election. By passing the SAVE Act, we can ensure that only eligible Americans are registering to vote. Additionally, the SAVE Act is aligned with President Trump's recent executive order, preserving and protecting the integrity of American elections, which will help restore trust in American elections, enhance election administration, and make our elections secure. This legislation is just one step that we can take to ensure President Trump's executive order could not be undone. Americans deserve to have confidence in our elections. We must pass the SAVE Act to prevent non-citizen voting and secure our elections. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The distinguished gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Together with President Trump's recent voting restrictive executive order, the SAVE Act would cripple American elections. It would end voter registration in the United States as we know it. The SAVE Act would end mail-in registration. You heard that right. For all those states and all those people who register by mail, not vote by mail, registration by mail. It would end that. American citizens would have to appear in person at an election office, bring with them various documents and forms to register to vote. Think about it. Just to exercise your fundamental, inalienable rights as a citizen of this country, Republicans would force Americans into a paperwork nightmare, burying voter registration under a mountain of bureaucracy and red tape. So what exactly would the SAVE Act do? It would create enormous burdens for every American citizen who seeks to register to vote. Let's dig into the details. As my Republican colleague and friend admitted at the Rules Committee, under the SAVE Act, most Americans would be unable to register to vote using their real ID. Further, under the SAVE Act, almost 70 million American women will be unable to register to vote using their birth certificate simply because they changed their name upon marriage. The bill would disenfranchise survivors of domestic abuse who have changed their names for safety purposes, which is truly shocking. And the SAVE Act will also have a steep financial cost to American citizens because, yes, the SAVE Act does allow Americans to use their passports to register to vote. But half of all Americans do not have a passport. And a passport costs $130 plus additional fees. So the SAVE Act will cost American voters who do not have passports and choose to use them billions of dollars to secure them. Americans are facing rising costs exacerbated by the recent Trump tariffs. Economists are warning about a looming Trump recession. But let's face it, the SAVE Act would force U.S. citizens to spend billions of dollars to register to vote. This includes rural voters, many of whom now register to vote online by mail, who will be forced to drive hours and cross hundreds of miles to present documentary proof. This includes senior citizens, who are particularly likely to lack documentary proof of citizenship, including passports, copies of their birth certificates, or other documents. And what about the men and women in uniform who serve our country all over the world? Can a member of our military use their military ID? Surely, military IDs should be enough to register to vote, not according to the SAVE Act. Service members will need to bring their military ID and a copy of their service record showing their place of birth within the United States. But many service members were born abroad, say to military parents overseas. Many are naturalized citizens. Those service members will be blocked from using their military ID to register to vote. And remember, the SAVE Act's requirement that Americans show their documentation in person at an election office. It will have drastic consequences. The SAVE Act will prevent members of our armed forces from registering to vote while deployed overseas. But the SAVE Act is not actually meant to prevent non-citizens from voting. The SAVE Act is really about silencing Americans. This bill is about disenfranchising Americans, not non-citizens, Americans, U.S. citizens. Americans like James Wilson, an Arizona voter who I met with last week, who was meant to join us in the gallery, who flew all the way to Washington, D.C. last week to watch Congress debate the SAVE Act. He was forced to fly home after the Speaker canceled 3 days of legislative work. Mr. Wilson is an American citizen, born in Japan to a military father during the Vietnam War. Mr. Wilson is also a veteran. He proudly served our nation overseas, including in Korea and Germany. Like millions of Americans, Mr. Wilson does not have a passport because he doesn't need a passport. Like millions of Americans, Mr. Wilson does not have access to his birth certificate. When Arizona introduced a restrictive voter registration law, a law just like the SAVE Act, Mr. Wilson's right to vote was imperiled. Mr. Wilson did not have any of the documents required by the Arizona law, required by the SAVE Act to prove his citizenship. But for a last-minute emergency court order, Mr. Wilson, an American citizen, a veteran, and a patriot, would not have been able to vote this past election. If the SAVE Act becomes law, Americans nationwide will face the same bureaucratic nightmare that Mr. Wilson faced in Arizona. The SAVE Act will force Americans, like Mr. Wilson, to pay billions of dollars to exercise their invaluable right to vote. House Republicans want to increase the burdens and amplify the costs in time, in money, and in effort for American citizens to vote. House Democrats do not. The SAVE Act would cost American citizens something deeply important, something essential to the soul of this nation, the right to freely and fairly participate in our elections. I strongly urge defeat of this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida, the chair of the Elections Subcommittee and the former Secretary of State of the state of Florida, Ms. Lee.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act is an important step forward that will ensure elections are more secure and accurate across the United States. The vast majority of Americans agree that only U.S. citizens should have the right to vote in our elections. Just last month, President Trump took a strong stance, reaffirming his commitment to the integrity of our elections. The President's executive order will help equip elections officials with better data and more resources to administer elections. Today, Congress has the opportunity to build on this momentum and ensure that these protections are part of our laws, that every state can follow these practices, and that voters across the nation can feel confident in the integrity and the security of their elections. Congress must commit to supporting elections officials and voters by making voting accessible and secure. While states are the primary authority on how elections are conducted on Election Day, it is our role here in Congress to ensure that we support them and provide resources to them and to promote uniformity and best practices across the country. One way that we will be able to help provide those resources to states is by passing the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act will help protect our elections and ensure that only American citizens are casting ballots in American elections. The bill will support state and local elections officials by providing them with data and tools to help verify the accuracy and completeness of their voter rolls. As Florida's former Secretary of State and Chief Elections Officials, I got to work with state and local elections workers across the country and saw their commitment to ensuring strong elections. Now, as the chair of the House Administration Subcommittee on Elections, I am proud to work alongside Chairman Stile to advance policies that lead to stronger elections across our country. These tools will help the states ensure their rolls are accurate and help prevent any unintended errors. We know that some states have continued to discover non-citizens on their voter rolls, and there is evidence that some of them have voted in recent elections. We must take steps to ensure this doesn't continue. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address the claim that the SAVE Act will somehow negatively affect married women or others who might have changed their name because their legal documentation or identification may reflect two different names. This legislation clearly contemplates exactly this situation and indeed directly addresses it. Page 14, line 19, directs the states to create a process for addressing this exact issue. Ever since the 19th Amendment passed over 100 years ago.
Gentlewoman's time has
I
expired.
yield an additional 30 seconds.
The gentleman has extended an additional 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Married women have been registering to vote and successfully voting. Indeed, I am among them. This bill will accommodate women who change their name who have not yet updated their documentation to reflect a name change because the SAVE Act explicitly directs states to establish a process for them to register to vote irrespective of those discrepancies. Like other areas of the law, citizens will be able to use combinations of existing identification documents in order to register to vote. I urge my colleagues to support this important legislation, and I yield back.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I always appreciate the work of my colleagues from the committee who we agree on many things. This is certainly not one of them. I do want to reflect on what the gentle lady from Florida has said, and others have said several times, that the SAVE Act allows states to create a process to provide additional proof of citizenship. Why not write it in the bill? Why are we making the potential for 50 different standards to be set to prove citizenship? What additional forms would be used? A birth certificate together with an ID, also including a marriage certificate, also including a record of a changed name? What must survivors of domestic abuse provide? Court orders protecting them from stalkers, restraining orders, divorce records, divorce papers? How much would that cost? How much paperwork do Republicans want Americans to drown in? Further, how long will these new rules take? The SAVE Act takes effect immediately. What if states take months or years to amend their systems? What if they never do it? So you might have someone interested in voting, but their state hasn't acted. They have no way of proving that the name on their birth certificate, which differs from the name in their ID, is because they got married. You'd be unable to register to vote. Here's what we do know. President Trump's executive order doesn't want any alternative forms of identification. No alternate state processes, no additional avenues for voters. Why do we expect the EAC to disregard the president's clear desire to limit documentary proof of citizenship to a small, exclusive, difficult-to-obtain list of options? And I would say, in addition to my dear friend, and I mean that sincerely, the gentleman from Wisconsin, like to remind him that an estimated 165,000 women in his district in Wisconsin have a different name on their birth certificate than is on their current photo ID. Under the SAVE Act, these women could not register using their birth certificate alone, and roughly 340,000 residents in Wisconsin's 1st District lack a passport. So the SAVE Act could cost voters in the district $45 million if they chose to comply that way. I'd also like to remind my colleague and friend, Representative Lee, an estimated 170,000 women in her district have a different name on their birth certificate than on their photo ID. Likewise, under this bill, these women could not use their birth certificate to register to vote because they have a different name now than at birth. Roughly 368,000 residents of Florida's 15th district lack a passport. It would cost voters in the district at least $47.8 million to secure a passport to register to vote. These are the facts. This is what the bill requires, and so we should not gloss over it because this is a mountain of bureaucratic red tape, and if you can't get it right in the bill, if you don't list marriage license in the federal bill and it's left to the states, who knows how and when we resolve these issues. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield a minute to the distinguished gentlewoman from the state of Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Morelli, for yielding. I rise today in strong opposition to the SAVE Act. This bill will make it more difficult to register to vote, and it will prevent millions of American citizens, including married women who change their name, and rural Americans, from exercising their right to vote. It creates an enormous and expensive unfunded mandate on election offices, and for what? Federal law already requires people to attest under penalty of perjury that they are U.S. citizens when they register to vote. Non-citizens attempting to register to vote is exceedingly rare, and if they do, they face severe consequences, including fines up to 5 years in prison and deportation. Mr. Speaker, more than 140 million Americans do not have a passport. Approximately 70 million women do not have a birth certificate that matches their current legal name. And millions of rural voters would have to travel long distances to try to register to vote. We don't have to guess what would happen if this bill were to pass. In 2011, Kansas had a proof of citizenship requirement that actually prevented more than 30,000, can I have extra 15 seconds?
Fired.
Would you extend the gentlelady 15 more seconds, Mr.
The
Speaker?
gentleman is extended.
Thank
the
you.
gentlewoman from
In Kansas,
Oregon,
more than
15 seconds.
30,000 U.S. citizens, 12% of everyone seeking to register to vote, were barred from voting. Other states have tried, and in all of them, significant number of citizens have been wrongly barred from voting. It's unacceptable, it's voter suppression, and it's wrong. I urge all of my colleagues to vote no on the SAVE Act, and I yield back the balance of my
Gentlewoman's
time.
time has expired. Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Illinois, a member of the Committee on House Administration, Ms. Miller, to speak on the bill.
Gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong support of the SAVE Act, which includes robust measures to prevent illegal aliens from participating in our elections. Under Joe Biden, millions of illegal aliens flooded into our country, and many were given the benefits and privileges that should be reserved for American citizens. In Illinois, J.B. Pritzker and the Democrats rolled out the red carpet and actively enticed illegals and those covered by Biden's bogus asylum programs to settle in my state to the tune of over 500,000 people. They received welfare benefits, CDL licenses, state identification, and the Democrats have even voted to allow them to be law enforcement officers. I do not have to tell you how dangerous this situation is for Americans, and especially for Americans' confidence in the sanctity of our elections. As far-left jurisdictions seek to allow illegals to vote in local elections, let me be clear about this one thing, this point. Every vote cast by an illegal alien is a vote stolen from an American citizen. Congress must defend the integrity of our elections. We must aggressively push back against the left's attempts to change the electorate and dilute the voices of actual Americans in our democratic process. This past week and today, all we hear are the Democrats sharing their concerns that rural Americans, women, and people of color are not capable of getting an ID. This is insulting, condescending, and an untrue argument. You need an ID for most everything else in daily life. Maybe if the Democrats would quit pushing for our schools.
Expired.
I yield an additional 30 seconds.
The
Okay.
gentleman has extended an additional 30 seconds to the
Thank you.
gentlewoman from Illinois.
Maybe the Democrats should quit pushing, wasting so much time in our public schools, indoctrinating our children, and instead teach them real-life skills such as reading, civics, and how to get an ID. I urge the passage of this bill, and I yield back the passage of my time.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from New York.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to just make note of the point that real ID in the United States does not have citizenship in almost all states. A handful have it, so you couldn't even use your real ID. So we're talking about voter ID and photo ID. It doesn't even allow you under the SAVE Act. So the gentle lady should read the bill. It doesn't allow it, and I think that's part of the problem. I would also just note, Mr. Speaker, in Representative Miller's district, an estimated 150,000 women in her district have a different name on their birth certificate than their current photo ID. Under the SAVE Act, these women could not use their birth certificate to register to vote and would not be able to use their ID, their driver's license. Roughly 414,000 residents of Illinois' 15th district lack a passport. So the SAVE Act would cost voters in Ms. Miller's district $53.8 million should they avail themselves of a passport to prove the requirements of the SAVE Act. And with that, I yield 1 minute to my friend, the distinguished gentle lady from North Carolina, Ms. Ross.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong opposition to the SAVE Act, which is a transparent attempt to disenfranchise millions of voters. The SAVE Act would change voter registration guidelines to require proof of U.S. citizenship in very narrow ways. However, those documents, as we've heard, a birth certificate or a passport, are not always easy to come by for certain Americans. This backward legislation would immediately disenfranchise the 69 million women who have changed their names after marriage or divorce and do not have a matching birth certificate. There is no cure in this bill. Millions of Americans would be forced to navigate the complicated process to change their birth certificate or be forced to pay more than $130 for a passport. Who would be prevented from voting? Working people who don't have the time to do it and low-income people who cannot afford to do it. House Democrats will not be silent while Donald Trump and Republicans try to disenfranchise millions of people. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. Does the gentleman seek to reserve his time from New York? The gentleman does seek to reserve his time. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, to speak on the bill.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, in every election, somebody wins and somebody loses. Democracy depends on the losing side trusting that the election was a fair and accurate reflection of the will of the majority. And the winning side depends on the same perception for the legitimacy of their office. For centuries, our elections were the gold standard for the world because they were very hard to cheat. 30-day registration, in-person Election Day voting, and proof of identity were essential components of this process. In recent years, in many states, the woke left has torn down these safeguards. Mail-in ballots where there's no chain of custody, counting ballots weeks after the election day, counting ballots in secret, ballot harvesting, same-day registration, turning Election Day into election month, and forbidding proof of identity all make cheating easy and destroy the public's confidence in the process. In many jurisdictions, the Democrats have made it clear they intend to allow non-citizens to vote, the ultimate in foreign election interference. Well, I have news for them. American elections are for Americans. The SAVE Act restores this vital principle by requiring proof of citizenship and identity in the federal elections that affect every American. Americans should pay close attention to this vote, for it will reveal those who would subvert your vote to foreign nationals. I yield back.
Gentleman from Wisconsin reserves his time. Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I remind the gentleman that in the United States of America, to vote in a federal election, you have to be a U.S. citizen, and if you're not, you're subject to penalties for attempting to register to vote, and you're subject to felonies and deportation if you do vote and you're not an American citizen. That's the current law. I also want to remind my friend, Mr. McClintock, that an estimated 135,000 women in his district have a different name on their birth certificate than they have on their current photo ID, and roughly 290,000 residents of California's 5th District lack a passport. The cost to those voters would be $37.7 million to get passports. And with that, I yield 1 minute to my dear friend, the gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Williams.
The gentlewoman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today as the Congresswoman for Georgia's 5th District, the cradle of the civil rights movement, the home of Dr. King, Ambassador Andrew Young, and my predecessor, the late Congressman John Lewis. I carry their legacy with me every time I walk onto this floor. The SAVE Act is everything our civil rights leaders fought against. And don't think that it won't impact you or folks that you know. If you got married and changed your name, your ID, it won't match your birth certificate. If you don't have a passport and your ID doesn't match your birth certificate, you can't prove your citizenship. According to the SAVE Act, you won't be able to vote. Right now, under Trump and Musk's disastrous economy, families like so many of those that I represent back home in Georgia are struggling to keep up with the cost of groceries, let alone adding $130 for a passport just to register to vote. In Georgia, over half of the population doesn't have a passport, and our driver's licenses, even the real ID, doesn't prove citizenship. This bill could force Georgians to pay more than $700 million just to register to vote. Y'all, that's a poll tax, plain and simple, and it's blatant voter suppression. Voter suppression by any other name.
Mr. Speaker,
gentleman's time has expired.
Could I yield
the gentleman from New York?
Yes, sir. I'd like to yield an additional 30 seconds to
the gentleman is extended. The gentlewoman from Georgia, 30 seconds.
Voter suppression by any other name is still voter suppression. This bill violates the 14th, 19th, and 24th Amendments, and is also every tenet of a free and inclusive democracy. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this disgrace of a voter suppression bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields her time. The gentleman from New York reserves his time. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Oklahoma, Ms. Bice, a member of the Committee on House Administration.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong support of the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility, or the SAVE Act. Under President Biden, nearly 5 million illegal aliens were released into the United States. Biden's failure at the southern border has diluted the voting power that is reserved for only American citizens. This crisis is not only a national security concern, but one that can seriously alter the outcome of our elections. Just this past election cycle, both the states of Alabama and Virginia removed thousands of registered voters who were not American citizens. Securing our elections is of paramount importance, and we must ensure that it is easy to vote and hard to cheat. The SAVE Act will strengthen our election administration, improve voter confidence, and ensure that American elections are only for American citizens. Specifically, it amends the National Voter Registration Act to require states obtain proof of citizenship when an individual registers to vote. But let me be clear. This legislation does not prohibit married women from voting, and the absurd narrative of this has gotten out of control. When you change your name, Mr. Speaker, just as I have when I got married, you have to provide your birth certificate and a marriage certificate. This is already required when you update your ID, your Social Security records, and yes, your voter registration too. When your name is legally changed, it updates across government systems. Real ID, passport, other valid forms of ID mentioned in the SAVE Act are sufficient proof of citizenship. And no, your birth certificate doesn't have to match your current ID. Let me just add this. The claim is that it will disenfranchise married women and others who might have changed their name because the documentation might show two different names. But the SAVE Act itself addresses this point, Mr. Speaker, in the text. Page 14, line 9, directs the states to create a process for addressing this exact issue. I find myself asking, why are the Democrats refusing to take steps to safeguard our elections and protect the votes of every single American citizen? I strongly support the SAVE Act, and I look forward to voting for it, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield.
Gentlewoman yields her time. Gentleman from Wisconsin saves his time. Reserves his time. The gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hate to disagree with my dear friend from Oklahoma, but the words marriage certificate do not appear anywhere in the SAVE Act. In fact, it could have been written in that way, since you're adding all these lists and requirements of people to do, but it actually does make it harder for almost 70 million American women to vote. 84% of women choose their husband's name when they get married. That's just a statistic. As we've discussed, under the SAVE Act, most Americans will be unable to use the standard issue driver's license when registering to vote because most real IDs don't include citizenship on them. They don't automatically update if you haven't registered at all. So when you go to register, there's nothing to have updated. You have your birth certificate. In the case of Mary Beth Bauer, that's what it says on her certificate. Her voter ID now, or her driver's license now says Mary Beth Morelli. She would not be able to register using those two pieces of information. She would have to get an additional part of documentation, which is not identified in the SAVE Act, to do it. I think we've talked about it at length. This is clearly intended to make it much more difficult. By the way, according to House Republicans, none of these women should be allowed to register votes. Roughly 25% of the U.S. citizen voting age population. I'd also like to just suggest to my friend from Oklahoma, Ms. Bice, an estimated 179,000 women in her district have a different name on their birth certificate than their current photo ID. And roughly 394,000 residents of Oklahoma's 5th District lacks a passport. So the SAVE Act would cost them $51.3 million to secure passports. With that, I will yield a minute to the gentleman and dear friend from California, Mr. Mullen.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Free and fair elections are the foundation of any functioning democracy. The SAVE Act is a blatant attempt to undermine our election system, weaken American democracy, and unfairly suppress millions of eligible citizens from voting. If the SAVE Act becomes law, eligible Americans would have to provide either a passport or birth certificate to register to vote and cast their ballot. About half of American citizens, roughly 150 million people, don't own a passport. If an eligible voter doesn't have the means to pay for a passport, they would need a birth certificate that states their current legal name. This act could suppress the votes of millions of women in this country who have changed their name after marriage. So to be clear, if you're a married woman I guess Republicans don't want you to vote. If you can't afford a passport, Republicans don't want you to vote. If you're a college student whose birth certificate is back home, Republicans don't want you to vote. Congress has a responsibility to ensure all eligible citizens can participate in free and fair elections. The SAVE Act would do the opposite. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from New York reserves his time. Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Boebert.
The gentlewoman from Colorado is extended 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and bless my colleagues' hearts on the other side of the aisle. Using married women as a gotcha for voting. I've never had to bring my birth certificate to prove that I was a registered voter. I have an ID that has a different name than my birth certificate. And also, since we're using women as bait here, maybe in the next round of debates, they could explain to us exactly what a woman is. I rise in support of the SAVE Act. The American people are done messing around with a woke, weak-kneed system that lets our elections get hijacked. I am fighting for you, for me, for every American who knows our vote is sacred, and it's time to lock it down with citizens only. Let's cut the crap. Right now, you can walk up, check a box, claiming you're a citizen, and boom, you're registered for federal elections. No proof, no ID. That's not a system built on trust. It's a system vulnerable to error, fraud, and exploitation. And in Colorado, it was just expedited for the process for illegals to receive a driver's license. And in the state of Colorado, when you obtain a driver's license, you register to vote. The SAVE Act is a common sense measure designed to protect the integrity of our electoral process, and at its core, it requires proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. This isn't radical. It's not extreme. It's a basic safeguard to ensure that only those who are legally entitled to participate in our elections can do so. Let's be clear, this isn't about denying anyone's right to vote. It's about protecting the rights of every American citizen, not adding votes and subtracting American citizens' votes. I support the SAVE Act. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields her time. Gentleman reserve his time.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserves his time. The chair will remind all persons in the gallery that they are here as guests of the House of Representatives and that any malfeasance of approval or disapproval of proceedings is in violation of the rules of the House. The gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I inquire as to the time remaining?
The gentleman from New York has 14 minutes. The gentleman from Wisconsin also has 14. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just note to the previous speaker that while Ms. Boebert has not had to bring all those documents, she hasn't had to register to vote under the SAVE Act. That's actually the point. And I would also remind her that an estimated 159,000 women in her district have a different name on their birth certificate than they have on their current photo ID, and that roughly 284,000 residents of Colorado's 4th District lack a passport. The SAVE Act could cost them $36.9 million to secure passports in order to register to vote. I would very much like to yield a minute to my friend, the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Ramirez.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to oppose the SAVE Act. Bottom line, the SAVE Act suppresses the votes of women, of Black, brown, and indigenous people, of veterans, and working class Americans. In advancing it, Republicans invoke those historical policies that were intended to disenfranchise Americans. Let me remind you what they were. Literacy tests and poll taxes for eligible voters, grandfather clauses which tied voters' right to their grandfathers before the Civil War, all-white primaries to eliminate Black voters' presence in the electoral process, and now the show me your papers. The SAVE Act is the same trash, just a different day. It is the Republicans' latest attempt to make clear who they believe should have access to vote and who they think should not. Anyone who votes for this bill will go down in the history books with the likes of Confederate politicians, Jim Crow advocates, and white supremacists as bigots. I urge my colleagues to vote no. With that, I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Illinois is yields her time. The gentleman from New York reserves his time. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the representative from Florida, Ms. Kamick, to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support. As a woman and as the chairwoman of the Republican Women's Caucus, not only just for election integrity, but clearly literacy, because y'all have not read the bill. That much is clear. This bill is very, very simple. It ensures that only American citizens can vote in our federal elections. This isn't hard. 87% of Americans agree that only Americans should vote in our elections. So it makes me wonder, why are my friends on the other side of the aisle always consistently looking for ways to ensure that illegals can vote in our elections? It's almost as though they have an ulterior motive. You have to show an ID to board a plane, to buy alcohol, to cash a check. You have to show an ID to buy cold medicine, for God's sakes. Why should people not have to verify their citizenship to register? And I say to register because my friend over here keeps pointing out that women in every single congressional district will have to provide proof of their name change in order to vote. Folks, read the bill, page 14. If you are registering to vote, there is a process by which the states establish. If you are already registered to vote, you are fine. Read the bill. Stop insulting women. I am sick and tired, and I know women across this country are sick and tired of being talked down to and being insulted repeatedly with the fear-mongering tactics of the left. It is disingenuous for them to stand there and continue to say that women will not be eligible to vote. This is about protecting one of our most sacred rights that we have as Americans. And I am so proud to stand here as a woman, as a married woman, and again, as the chair of the Republican Women's Caucus, in safeguarding and ensuring the integrity of our elections. I urge my colleagues to do the same.
Time is expired.
I yield an additional 15 seconds.
The gentleman from Wisconsin yields her an additional 15 seconds. Thank you.
I can keep preaching for an additional 30. The point is that Americans around this country are sick and tired of the fear-mongering tactics that they have been subjected to by the left for decades. We need to ensure the integrity of our elections. It has been demanded by the American people, and we're making good on that promise today. I urge my colleagues to support the SAVE Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Expired. Gentleman from Wisconsin reserves this time. Gentleman from New York.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think my colleagues doth protest too much. I've read the bill many times, debated the bill. There's nothing in the bill that allows you to bring a marriage license to prove who you are when you register to vote. You will have to do all the things we suggest you will have to do, and that's exactly the problem. And I'd like to also just remind my colleague and friend from Florida that in Ms. Kamick's district, an estimated 170,000 women in her congressional district have a different name on their birth certificate than on their current photo ID, and that roughly 409,000 residents of Florida's 3rd congressional district lack a passport. The cost to those individuals, $53.1 million to secure passports. With that, my dear friend, a member of our committee and the ranking member of the subcommittee on elections of House Administration, distinguished gentlelady from Alabama, Ms. Sewell, I'd like to yield her 2 minutes.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong opposition to the House Republican so-called SAVE Act, the most restrictive voting law to be considered by this body in decades. The SAVE Act is just the latest in the ongoing assault on our democracy by President Trump and his allies in Congress. Instead of working to meet the needs of American people, House Republicans are busy spreading fear and lies to justify their attempts to disenfranchise millions of eligible voters. Let's be clear, it is already against the law for non-Americans to vote. This bill is a solution in search of a problem. The SAVE Act would create new barriers to the ballot box for millions of eligible voters. That includes almost 70 million American women who got married and changed their last name. It also includes 140 million Americans without a passport, and it includes Americans with military and tribal IDs. To be clear, this bill is not about protecting our elections. It's about making it harder for Americans to vote and easier for Republicans to win. As elected officials, we should be working to expand access to the ballot box, not restrict it. Congress should be considering H.R. 14, the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, to ensure that every American can freely and fairly vote. Mr. Speaker, this is very personal to me. I am not only the representative of America's Civil Rights District, but I am also the proud daughter of Selma, Alabama. It was in my hometown where hundreds of foot soldiers were bludgeoned on a bridge for the equal right of all Americans to vote. This legislation before us today makes a mockery of their legacy. I urge all of my colleagues to vote no on the SAVE Act. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves his time. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bean, to speak on the bill.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. One citizen, one vote. It's the pillar of our democracy. And, Mr. Speaker, you would think that of all the issues that we debate on this hallowed floor, this is the one. This is the one that brings everybody together. The pillar of our democracy, one citizen, one vote. Everybody's on the same team. Mr. Speaker, you would be wrong. It's amazing you would be wrong, because there are people in this room that think women are incapable of getting an ID. I think that's an insult to women. Mr. Speaker, let me remind you why we're here. We're here because this previous administration, the Biden administration, imported 10 to 15 million illegal aliens who have come here, and we have evidence that they're participating in our elections. The next thing you'll say is, did they get Social Security numbers? Mr. Speaker, they did. The Doge team just announced millions of illegals now have Social Security numbers. It's happening, and it ends today when we vote on this SAVE Act. Now, I've just heard my colleagues say it's already against the law. It's already against the law. We don't need this act. But let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, why it's already against the law for a minor to buy beer, but yet the clerk checks the ID before the purchase is made. We need the SAVE Act. We need security. We need to come together, and I will invite our colleagues to come together. There's still time to agree that the pillar of our democracy is one citizen, one vote. The right answer on the SAVE Act is a yes vote. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman's time. He yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin reserves his time. The gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The gentleman's comments leads me to the question. Do Republicans believe that every attestation under federal law is rife for subversion? Americans must attest under penalty of perjury that their tax returns contain correct information. Do Republicans want to end this honor system by requiring Americans to provide even more documentation to the Internal Revenue Service? It's a federal crime to lie on alcohol, tobacco, and firearms form 4473, the firearms transaction record. That form is filled out under the same honor system that governs voter registrations. Are you telling me that Republicans are open to strengthening gun licensing laws in the United States and no longer accept attestation? Each of us must submit records to the FEC, attesting under penalty of perjury that our campaign committee reports are accurate. Do Republicans now want to provide the American people greater transparency around political spending? Because if they do, I've got a bill they can support, the Freedom to Vote Act. I'd also just suggest to the gentleman, Representative Bean, that an estimated 170,000 women in his district have a different last name on their birth certificate than is on their current photo ID, and roughly 397,000 residents of Florida's 4th District do not have a passport. It would cost them $51.7 million to secure one. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman, my friend from New Jersey, Mr. Conaway.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong opposition to the SAVE Act. While everyday Americans are struggling from the fallout of Trump's disastrous tariff policies, Republicans are pushing through a bill that strips Americans' constitutional right to vote, a vote that was hard-won and for which many died. They claim the SAVE Act is intended to prevent undocumented immigrants from voting, but it's already illegal for them to vote, and it is extremely rare. In reality, the SAVE Act makes it harder for Americans, especially women and people of color, to participate in our elections. We've seen these tactics before, creating barriers to the ballot box to suppress the vote, and yet Republicans continue to find ways to undermine democracy. I urge my colleagues to take a hard look in the mirror and ask themselves, do you want to stand on the side of voter suppression, or do you want to stand on the side of democracy? I choose democracy and will vote no on this dangerous anti-American bill. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves his time. Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, we're hearing from the other side that it's already illegal for non-citizens to vote. That's true. It's also illegal to evade Border Patrol and cross the border illegally into the United States of America. But enforcement matters. And we can look at what happens when you don't enforce the law under the Biden administration, what happens when you enforce the law under the Trump administration. I think back about when I went home to my hometown in Janesville, Wisconsin the other day, and I went to buy a six-pack of beer. I walked in, and the gentlewoman at the desk said, "Brian, good to see you." Went back, grabbed a six-pack of beer, came up. She said, "Brian, I need to see your ID." Pulled out my ID and handed it to her. She reviewed it. She allowed me to purchase a six-pack of beer. Am I the only one here that thinks it's absolutely absurd that we protect our beer more than we protect our ballots? This law allows us to make sure that only U.S. citizens are voting in U.S. elections. Mr. Speaker, it's about enforcement of the law. I would ask my colleagues across the aisle, how many non-citizen votes should be okay? The answer to me and my colleagues on this side of the aisle is 0. Because every non-citizen that votes in a federal election in the United States of America cancels out the vote of a U.S. citizen. As we know in this chamber, very often House races are close. One of our representatives in this chamber was elected by simply 6 votes. One non-citizen voting in a federal election in the United States is too many. And the arguments I'm hearing from my colleagues on the left is that they're okay with non-citizens voting. It's essential that not only do we have the law, we enforce the law. And the SAVE Act does just that. It's my good friend Chip Roy from the state of Texas, the author of the bill, who I've been working with to do just that. And I now yield my friend, the gentleman from Texas, Chip Roy, as much time as he may consume to speak on the bill.
The gentleman has provided the gentleman from Texas for as much time as he may consume. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank the Speaker. I want to thank the chairman for his strong work and commitment to election integrity and to working with us on this bill, in particular, the SAVE Act. He's done an extraordinary job, and I'm proud to work with him and work with the rest of my colleagues on it. I'm proud to work with my friend Cleta Mitchell, who had a significant hand in what we were doing here. I'm quite certain that she is pretty well aware of protecting the right of females to be able to vote, along with my friends Stephanie Bice and Mary Miller and Laurel Lee, and Lauren Boebert, and Kat Kamak, all of who came down to the floor in full support of this legislation, because they know the truth. They know the truth that the American people know, which is that as much as my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to bring up the DMV, the American people know that the DMV is very good at giving driver's license to illegal aliens, because we know it to be true. We know that there are people who have been indicted for voting illegally. We know that there are voter rolls with massive numbers of people who are illegally present in the United States. We know that the previous administration let in millions of people into the United States wrongfully and illegally under parole and asylum, blatantly abusing the law to put people in the United States that have no basis for being here many of whom carried out dangerous acts against American people, killed American citizens, but importantly, have been registering to vote. That's what's been happening. So what we understand is the American people have spoken very clearly that they believe only American citizens should vote in American elections. There's nothing controversial about that. There's nothing controversial about saying that you should be able to ensure that only citizens vote. And let's be very clear. Federal law has currently been interpreted to prohibit states from being able to check citizenship. That's the truth. That's why the state of Arizona, for example, has two systems, one for state and local, one for federal.
When he speaks, the gentleman's continued to
The
recognize.
good people of Arizona have two systems in place. They check for citizenship for state and local elections, and they're unable to check for citizenship in federal elections. The point of this bill is to ensure that we guarantee only citizens vote by allowing those states to be able to check, by having systems, federal systems, be open to the states to be able to check, and to require proof of citizenship when you register. There's nothing complex about that. There's nothing more sacred under the Constitution than ensuring that the people are able to have the voice in the election of the people that represent them in Washington and throughout the country. Once that is undermined, then people lose faith in the very institutions upon which this is built. This legislation is designed to restore that faith, to save our elections, to save election integrity. I'm proud to have worked on this bill with my friend, the chairman, with my colleagues on this side of the aisle, and I would note that 5 of my Democrat colleagues joined us last summer to vote for this bill. Hardly a partisan exercise. Hardly a partisan exercise to say that we should protect the elections of the American people. So I urge my colleagues to support this bill, to restore confidence and faith in our elections, to take a step forward in ensuring that people know that citizens will be in control of this republic as the founders intended. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Wisconsin reserves his time. Gentleman from New York.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a inquiry on time.
The gentleman from New York has 7 minutes remaining.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like now to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Alabama, my friend, Mr. Figures.
The distinguished gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, all of my colleagues today are speaking about this bill, and it's personal to me because I represent Alabama. I represent the birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement, and I would be remiss not to mention that election integrity was not an issue that my colleagues have been pushing until Donald Trump told them that they should be pushing this issue. Americans have confidence in elections. But see, for me, it's about too many people doing too many things too courageously for me to be able to stand here today. Names like James Reed and Jimmy Lee Jackson and Viola Liuzzo, Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, Michael Schwerner. These are people who died for me to be here today. Congressman John Lewis, who most of you served with, died for me to be here today. And this bill would make it tougher than it has ever been in American history to register to vote at a time where we have the technological ability to be able to verify election eligibility. But we don't want to do that. We want to make it tougher for people to actually get registered to vote. And that is not what we should be doing. We should be making it easier for people to vote. Easier.
Time has expired.
I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves his time. Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, can I inquire the time remaining?
The gentleman has 3.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute to my friend and colleague, the representative from California, Mr. Kiley, to speak.
The gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today as a co-sponsor of the SAVE Act to advance the radical proposition that only American citizens should vote in American elections. Now, of course, this isn't radical at all. It is common sense. I think the vast majority of Americans would be shocked to learn that it elicits any opposition at all. In many states in this country, foremost my own state of California, the administration of our elections is completely out of touch with the rest of the developed world, falling well short of the standards that ought to exist in a modern democratic society. This measure, requiring proof of citizenship in order to vote, is a needed corrective. I believe in my state it will complement other initiatives that we are advancing now to require voter ID and to have a timely vote counting process in order to restore public confidence in our election process. What is at stake is not only election integrity and election security, but democratic legitimacy, and ensuring that our people have the ability to express themselves fully and our own identity as a state and a country through the democratic process. I urge passage of this on a bipartisan basis.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Wisconsin reserves his time. Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentle lady from California, Ms. Friedman.
Gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
California.
California.
Thank you. Thank you, Ranking Member Morelli. I rise in strong opposition to the so-called SAVE Act, a bill that is a modern-day poll tax targeting American women and low-income Americans. This bill bans voter ID. It bans using driver's licenses as voter ID unless they're backed by additional proof of citizenship, a requirement that excludes nearly all driver's licenses and real IDs issued today. Now, for women who have changed their names, often through marriage, this means showing a passport or a birth certificate that may not match their legal name. That would have meant that my grandmother, who had long since lost her birth certificate, would have been ineligible to vote under this bill. In California alone, that would include more than 7 million women. Now, this would force those women to pay $130 just to get a passport they need to vote. With nearly a third of Californians lacking passports, this bill would cost them more than $1.25 billion statewide. If you have to pay to vote, that's called a poll tax, plain and simple. It is also unnecessary red tape for people just trying to cast a ballot. This is a bill in search of a problem. We have enough trouble getting American citizens to vote.
The gentleman's time has expired. The
Yes,
gentleman
thank you.
reserves his time. Does the gentleman seek to reserve your time?
I reserve my time, Mr.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
The gentleman will reserve his time pending his, I believe, close. The gentleman's given that right. The gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield to my dear friend, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Latimer.
The gentleman
for
from
1
New
minute.
York is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morelli. The American people in my district and in my state have spoken clearly. This bill is voter suppression, pure and simple. It's brought to us under the guise of stopping illegal voting. And when we analyzed voting in Westchester County, 1 million people that I was the county executive of, we found no appreciable illegal voting. But this is an opportunity for this majority to try to impose their will on the states that they don't already control. They want to end mail voter registration in my home state to satisfy other states' regressive laws. They want to require people who have voted legally for years to prove their citizenship if they not only change their name, but if they move. A simple move requires them to drive to a county board of elections and prove that they're an American citizen when they have proven that over the course of 20 years or more of voting. This bill subjects local officials to hefty criminal fines if they register someone outside of these rules. This is an expensive, unfunded mandate in Westchester, in New York City, and in all the other states that are involved. Mr. Speaker, I yield my time back. Thank you, Mr. Morelli.
Yields back his time. Gentleman from New York has 4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Wisconsin has chosen to save his time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was remiss earlier. I do want to remind my colleague, Mr. Roy, an estimated 150,000 women in his district have a different name on their birth certificate than on their photo ID, and 336 residents of Texas's 21st district lack a passport to a cost of $43.7 million to those who would need to get a passport should they choose that. Also, I'd like to remind my colleague, Representative Kiley, an estimated 135,000 women in his district have a different name, and roughly 268,000 residents of California's 3rd district do not have a passport. The cost to them for getting one, $34.8 million. And with that, I'd like to yield 2 minutes To my friend, the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Johnson.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in opposition to the Voters' Republican Suppression Act. I want to give Republicans one chance to actually fulfill the rhetoric that they are spouting to the American people, which is actually giving people the right to vote. I appreciate that I appreciate efforts to ensure that our elections are safe, free from foreign interference, and that only U.S. citizens can vote. However, one of my concerns with this bill is that as it's written, it does not allow for mail or online voter registration. This bill, let me be perfectly clear, requires hardworking American people who go to work at 8 in the morning, who don't get off till 5 p.m., to go in person to a voter registration office, to take off work, to go in person to register to vote. That is why I have offered an amendment to have online voter registration. There are millions of service members and their families serving our countries overseas, individuals with disabilities, seniors who are unable to vote in person. Why are we keeping these barriers for eligible citizens when the world is evolving around us? We live in modern times, and so many of our lives happen online, from daily activities. We can pay our bills, we can pay our taxes online. You can apply for college, you can apply for a car and home and everything else online. For this reason, at the appropriate time, I will offer a motion to recommit this bill back to committee. If the House rules permitted, I would have offered the motion with my common sense amendment to this bill. My amendment would ensure Americans could still register to vote and prove their citizenship, online or by mail. This is a simple common sense amendment, and it would make certain that we can care for the people who can't get out of their homes, and that this Congress is not depriving any eligible citizen of their right to vote. Republicans have refused this amendment. Republicans are refusing your ability to go and make it easy for citizens to register to vote in this country. Republicans can now vote to pass this amendment. I ask unanimous consent to insert the record of this text of this amendment, and I hope my colleagues will join me, and I yield back.
Without objection, the gentlewoman yields. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
And I would reserve the balance of my time.
Well, the gentleman, it's my understanding the gentleman reserves the right to close, so the gentleman from New York would now be recognized for the time remaining.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The SAVE Act is, to put it nicely, the most severe voter suppression bill ever considered at the federal level. Coupled with President Trump's recent anti-voter executive order, the SAVE Act would end the voter registration process for all Americans as they know it. Republicans have repeatedly failed to present any evidence that non-citizen voting at a federal level has ever affected the outcome of any election. The SAVE Act will make it harder for American citizens to vote, to make it harder for married women to vote, to make it harder for service members, students, rural Americans, senior citizens, native voters, survivors of natural disasters, and survivors of domestic abuse to vote, to make voting more expensive, in fact, to force American families to pay billions of dollars just to register to vote. Democrats want a country where every American citizen can vote. That's why we champion bills like the Freedom to Vote Act, the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and the Native American Voting Rights Act, not the SAVE Act. I fiercely oppose this anti-American bill. I urge every one of my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats alike, to defeat this extremist anti-voter SAVE Act. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back time. The distinguished gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for his remaining 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The SAVE Act is clear. Only U.S. citizens should vote in U.S. elections. Let's summarize the arguments here. My colleagues on this side of the aisle believe that only U.S. citizens should vote in U.S. elections, and we should keep it that way. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle just moments ago said that there's no appreciable illegal voting. Well, how much illegal voting should be allowed in the United States of America? My opinion, no non-citizens should vote in U.S. elections. We can go down and look at the data. Illinois had to remove 600 non-citizens from their voter rolls. Pennsylvania had to remove 10,000 non-citizens from their voter rolls. Georgia, 1,600 non-citizens attempted to register. And in our nation's capital, where they allow non-citizens to vote in municipal elections, This past November, 388 non-citizens voted here in our nation's capital municipal elections. You'll hear the argument from my colleagues across the aisle that it's already illegal to vote if you're a non-citizen in a federal election. Well, I'd tell them, as I said earlier, it's already illegal to evade Border Patrol and to come into this country. But Joe Biden was happy to not enforce the law. Millions of illegal immigrants have come into the United States of America. And the National Voter Registration Act is drafted by this body. If you broke it, you got to fix it. We got to fix the voting laws. The National Voter Registration Act requires states to give voter registration materials when an individual comes to get a driver's license. So in states that give driver's license to illegal aliens, like the state of Illinois, just to the south of my home state of Wisconsin, they're handed voter registration materials. Mr. Speaker, I view that as insane. We should be making sure that only U.S. citizens are voting in U.S. elections. You'll hear arguments about it's burdensome. Mr. Speaker, I think it's absurd that we're protecting beer more than we're protecting ballots. You have to show a photo ID when you go in to buy a six-pack of beer. You should have to go in and show that you're a U.S. citizen when you register to vote. It's just that simple. And I remind my colleagues that we had this debate in this chamber last Congress. 5 Democrats joined us in voting for this bill. Well, in a few moments, we'll be voting, Mr. Speaker. It'll be darn interesting to see how many Democrats have the courage to come across the line and say, yes, only U.S. citizens should vote in U.S. elections. My colleagues should support this bill, and I yield back.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 294, the previous question is ordered on the bill. The questions on the engrossment and third reading of the bill, those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to amend the National Voter Registration Act of 1993 to require proof of United States citizenship to register an individual to vote in elections for federal office and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Ms. Johnson of Texas moves to recommit the bill H.R. 22 to the Committee on House Administration.
Pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 19, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. All those in favor shall say aye. Those opposed, no. No. The noes have it. The motion is not agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Will resume on questions previously postponed. Votes will be taken in the following order. The motion to concur in the Senate amendment to the House Concurrence Resolution 14 if ordered. The motion to recommit H.R. 22 and the passage of H.R. 22 if ordered. The first vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, remaining electronic votes will be conducted on 5-minute votes. Pursuant to Clause 1C of Rule 19, further consideration of House Concurrent Resolution 14 will now resume. The clerk will report the title.
House Concurrent Resolution 14, Concurrent Resolution establishing the congressional budget for the United States government for fiscal year 2025 and setting forth the appropriate budgetary levels for fiscal years 2026 through 2034, Senate amendment.
The question is on the motion offered by the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Arrington. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to consider is.
I request the yeas and nays.
Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested by the gentleman from Wisconsin. Those favoring a vote for the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.